For Eric J on Sports, I'm Eric J, and this is what I think. Against the advice of some of the members of my inner circle, pun intended, I listen to commentary from some of the old heads that I talk about often, the guys that were involved in professional wrestling 20, 30 years ago, and still see professional wrestling as an interplay between good and evil, black and white, where there always has to be a good guy, and there always has to be a bad guy, and there always has to be animosity between the two combatants before there can be a match of any substance. And when I watch AEW and they go away from that, it drives these guys nuts because they think that there should always be a good guy and there should always be a bad guy. Their point being with this type of thinking is that the fans need someone to root for. So if there's always a good guy and there's always a bad guy, the fans will know to root for the good guy. Well, the truth is this all changed with the NWO because the fans began rooting for the bad guy. And then in WWE in the last 15 years, the fans would boo good guy John Cena and boo good guy Roman Reigns to the point where Roman Reigns became the bad guy and now he's cheered. Adam Cole is a bad guy and he gets cheered a ton in AEW just on his entrance. So the interplay between good and evil is kind of outdated and doesn't make sense. But what's your point, Eric? What are you talking about? Well, what I'm talking about is the most recent episode of NXT where they established the sides for their upcoming War Games. Now, everybody that follows professional wrestling knows the story that Johnny Gargano's contract expires in early December, but he extended himself for a week so he could participate in the War Games. But the War Games teams are not split between two factions that are feuding. It's not Hit Row against the Undisputed Era or something like that. It's not Imperium going up against whoever. The teams for the War Games are split based on original NXT wrestlers, if you will, and the NXT 2.0 crew. But that raises an interesting question. Who are the fans supposed to root for? Well, I think that the fans are supposed to root for the 2.0 guys, because that would give Vince McMahon what he wants. He would be able to say, yes, I gave the fans what they wanted when they didn't even know they wanted it. But if you look at the originals team, which is what we'll call it for the purpose of this conversation, if you look at for the originals team, you've got arguably the most popular wrestler in NXT right now, Tommaso Ciampa, the NXT champion. Then you've got Johnny Gargano, who is kind of a tweener because he's a heel, but he's a comedy heel, so he's kind of in between. But Tommaso and Gargano, former tag team partners, hate each other. And then you've got Pete Dunne, who is a heel, but is so talented a heel that fans still cheer him. But he hates Tommaso also, and he also craves the NXT title. And then finally you have LA Knight, who came in as a heel and was a good heel to the point where he actually made Cameron Grimes a better babyface. But now he's a babyface because he did a double turn with Grayson Waller, who's on the other team. And now he is a pseudo babyface, but I'm sure he also wants the NXT title. But that's one side. Popular champion, the two guys who hate him the most, and probably the perfect heel in the company or on the brand, who's now a babyface, which doesn't even make sense. But on the other side, you have Braun Breaker, the son of Rick Steiner, the nephew of Scott Steiner, who could just have been Rex Steiner and had a great name, but that's another conversation for another day. You have Braun Breaker, who's being positioned as the top babyface in the company, but he's acting like a heel because he's bad-mouthing and belittling everybody else. And then you have Grayson Waller, who was a babyface, is now a heel, hates LA Knight, but he's on the same side as Braun Breaker because they're both two young guys. And you have Tony D'Angelo, the mobster, who is as much of a clown in NXT as Johnny Swinger is in Impact Wrestling, but at least Johnny Swinger's been around for a long time and has been this clown for a long time, and this is just his character. But you have him, And so you don't know what side he's actually on. He's probably a babyface because the fans laugh at his antics, but he may be a heel too. Who knows? And then you have the North American champion, who is more than likely a heel because he always walks around with a backup and he uses his backup to win matches and does heel things. So you've got an old heel, new heel, a babyface that acts like a heel, and then a clown on one team. And you've got a babyface, a tweener, a heel, and a recent turn on the other team, but everybody's coveting the NXT title, and they're all on the same team. So the question is, as Jim Cornette would say, or as Conan and Disco Inferno would say, or as Booker T would say, or Mark Henry, or any of these old guys that do podcasts that think that wrestling should be the way it was in the 90s, who are we rooting for? What side are we supposed to pick? Like I said, I think we're supposed to pick the side of 2.0. We're supposed to think that the new guys are greater than the old guys. The new guys are better than the old guys. The 20-year-olds are what we want to see as opposed to the 40-year-olds. I think that's what we're supposed to feel. We're supposed to like what Vince wants us to like. Because Vince has always said he knows what we want better than we do. So we're supposed to like what he tells us to like, and that would be the young guys. But if you're a fan of wrestling, then you like Ciampa, and you like Gargano, and you like Pete Dunne. Even if you're a fan of sports entertainment, you like LA Knight, the former Eli Drake. But if you're a fan of character-based sports entertainment from the 80s where you had the wrestling garbage man, and you had the wrestling hockey player, and you had the wrestling baseball player, and you had a clown who had a clown little person as his backup, and you got these 7-foot former basketball players who don't even speak English and can't really move, but you're making them into world champions. You've got this going on, and you got a guy that's coming to the ring in a mask, and his name is Who, so the announcers can do an Abbott and Costello who's on first bit during his match. Then you like the new guys. The wrestling mobster. And the former son of a former champion who does not recognize that he's a former champion, but the announcers keep making reference to his former champion dad and his former champion uncle. And he even dresses like his dad and uncle. And he wrestles like his dad and uncle, and he looks like his dad and uncle, and he talks like his dad and uncle, but he's not related to his dad or his uncle. You have that on the other side. And we're supposed to root for those guys, because that's what Vince wants. We're not supposed to root for these 40-year-old guys, because they're all going to be put out to pasture at some point. Because as you see in WWE, all the old guys are being released. Because if you were fired, you'd actually have to be an employee, and then you'd be entitled to unemployment benefits and things like that. You're being released from a contract because you're an independent contractor. But you can't work anywhere else, but that's another conversation for another day. So they're all being released, all the old guys. So we're supposed to root for the young guys. Even though Grayson Waller is detestable, and the North American champion is supposed to be detestable because he does heel things and he walks around with backup who interferes in his matches. We're not supposed to root for the most popular guy in the company, Tommaso Ciampa. We're not supposed to root for that guy. We're not supposed to root for Johnny Gargano, whose segments are the most entertaining segments on the show. We're not supposed to root for that guy. We're not supposed to root for LA Knight, who just recently did a double turn with Grayson Waller and is now a good guy. And we're not supposed to root for Pete Dunne, probably the best wrestler who has the best matches bell to bell in the brand. We're not supposed to root for those guys. So to answer your question, old heads, we're supposed to root for who Vince tells us who to root for, even though the teams in the war games are so convoluted and so confusing that I would be surprised if they didn't start fighting amongst themselves. And that could happen. But for now, you have your old guy team versus your 2.0 team, which is similar to what they did in WCW, when you had the older guys facing the young guys. But WCW went out of business when they started doing business that way. When they started trying to push a bunch of young, untested guys at the behest of guys like Nash and Sting and Lex Luger and the Steiners and Booker T and Stevie Ray and all the older guys that had been in business forever and knew how to sell tickets and knew how to draw money and knew how to have a show. You started pushing these young guys directly out of the power plant, and WCW went out of business. And then these young guys went over to WWE, and none of them could keep their jobs. But the older guys like Booker T and Hall and Nash and Sting and the Steiners continue to find work. I'm not saying young guys are bad. I'm just saying young guys are young guys and they need more seasoning. But at least now we know, because we've talked about it. And that's what you have to do sometimes. You have to discuss these things out loud so you can get a better understanding. At least now we know what we're supposed to be doing. We are supposed to root for the 2.0 guys because that's what Vince wants. He wants us rooting for his young guys. So it should be an interesting War Games, because in truth, how will Johnny Gargano defend Tommaso Ciampa if Tommaso gets in trouble? Or how will Pete Dunne defend either one of those two guys if they get in trouble because they hate each other and they all want the NXT title? But even on the other side, how will Braun Breaker defend Tony D'Angelo and Grayson Waller because they might all want the North American title at some point? So it should be an interesting interplay. And at the end of it, when everything goes back to normal, will it even make sense? Probably not, but not a lot in WWE makes sense these days anyway. Remember to like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. And follow me on Facebook at Eric J on Sports 1 and on Instagram and Twitter at Eric J on Sports. And for Eric J on Sports, I'm Eric J, and this is what I think.